Steve. All right, I think we are back, I'm hoping. So this is the council workshop on the downtown improvement project that they asked for. I would just kind of remind the council, this project first appeared in the CIP in fiscal year 18, and there were a bunch of opportunities in 2017 and in 2018 for public comment. In 2022, we had the ad hoc steering committee, which met 10 times and was open to public comment at that time. And then after the steering committee submitted their recommendations, as you're all familiar, there were another 6 public meetings where input was accepted. And so in total, that brought opportunities for public input on this project to 21, which I think is a lot. Probably rivals the master plan. Was the last time that there were that many opportunities for public input. And I think that public input is important and great, but I just wanted to remind the council about that. There won't be any public input tonight. And I'm very happy to see people out in the crowd. You're welcome to listen, and but I would ask that you maintain the same levels of decorum that I ask all the city councilors to maintain, which is to just be respectful when people are speaking and not weigh in from the crowd with either support or in a negative way for what councilors are saying. They're really here to discuss this issue and decide what they want to do, so let's let them do that work. And with that, I've got one more thing. I also just needed to comment and correct some misinformation. It was recently brought to my attention that there was some misinformation circulated on social media regarding the meeting reminder for tonight that you all got, the city council got by text message. This is not an unusual practice, actually. It's not in violation of any state law for the clerk to send out such reminders. We really do work hard to make sure that the councilors are aware of when and where they need to show up, but it's not a back and forth opportunity, and there's never really been any sort of discussion taking place by text or anything like that. It really is a meeting reminder, and so I just wanted to get that out there and remind the city councilors that it is a one-way way to get information, so do not respond to the messages that you get about when to meet. And finally, I would like to now, you've got a committee report that we're going to file as informational.
This is a Municipal Services Facility and Infrastructure Committee report, which was before the council on June 1 and was at that meeting with 4 opposed. The motion was to refer that recommendation to a workshop on a date to be determined after the Jeff Speck visit, and that is this evening.
All right, so we'll file that as informational, and I would invite our Public Works Director, Kurt Blomquist, and our consultants from Stantec to give us a sort of overview of where we're at.
Great. Good evening, Mayor, City Councilors. I'm Kurt Blomquist, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director. This evening I have with me Ed Ruggiero. I'm just going to butcher it tonight. I have Ed with me from Stantec, who's the consultant project manager. He also has several other his team members here that will be available to talk about anything particular that may come up tonight. I just want to let you know you received a number of items prior to this evening for your review. On Friday, June 30th, 2023, you received copies of the 4 options that have been identified for discussion this evening. Then on Monday, July 3rd, you received copies of the option summary graphic that went out to all of you. All these graphics were then posted on the project website on the afternoon of July 3rd. I also want to address, there's been a number of concerns raised about new information. The information that has been represented in the graphics this evening is not necessarily new information. It's not necessarily new options, etc. It's a consolidation of information that has been provided and made available and refined through various workshops and other activity that this council has worked on and ad hoc committees that you have appointed. All options here, I want to remind you right at this point, all options involve the replacement and upgrade of the underground infrastructure, so you can kind of think of that as the cake, which is the majority of the work. The remaining surface treatments are more of the frosting to make the cake work well and look good. These options all include the proposed Gilbo Railroad Street treatment process. So as you're thinking through this, those two components are consistently throughout all the options that you're going to be talking about this evening. Just to kind of refresh your mind, the MSFI recommendation, which is maintaining the general configuration of Main Street and Central Square with adjustments to sidewalk areas, crosswalks, was presented and was part of the Mayor's Ad Hoc Steering Committee review in between September and December of 2022. The Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee recommendation, which is the two-lane configuration, dedicated bicycle facilities with the roundabout intersection, was reviewed in that same time frame and then forwarded to the council in December of 2022. The multi-lane hybrid option, which is maintaining two traffic lane configurations with dedicated bicycle facilities and maintaining the existing traffic flow pattern in Central Square. The Main Street lane configuration was also part of the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee steering review, and that was also reviewed between September and December of 2022. The single-lane hybrid option, which is to have a single lane along Main Street dedicated to dedicated bicycle facilities and expanded space within traffic flow patterns in Central Square. I know this option has recently gained some more interest as a result of some discussions in the community, but a single-lane option was presented to the steering committee in December of 2022. Finally, the single lane, most all this information, as I've indicated on these options, have been in all the processes since December of 2022. The other information that you have and have been reviewing, for example, the various levels of service for various intersections, including Central Square, including the configuration of the existing Central Square, a 5-way lighted intersection, a roundabout, were originally presented to the Ad Hoc Mayor's Committee in November of 2022. So that information was gathered and presented there. The tree inventory, as people have asked about that, that information was presented in October of 2022 to the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee. And other information about parking, utilization, number of spaces, et cetera, and the initial impacts on that parking was also presented to the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee in October of 22 and December of 2022. So this information, again, as I had said, is not necessarily new. It has been out there. It has gone through all the other meetings the mayor, I think, indicated that you have. It just has been presented in different ways to try to communicate what's been happening with that. The information, all this information that we have talked about from the Mayor's Ad Hoc Steering Committee all the way through all the various public meetings in January of 23, February of 23, your meetings in March and April of this year have been all available on the project website. So that information has been available and has been out there for perusal by the public and others who are interested, just like the information this evening that you are going to be looking at that has been available since Monday. I'm going to turn over to Ed now, who's going to briefly review these options with you to go back over what they are, and then we'll be here to answer your questions. Thank you. Ed?
Thank you, Court. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. You know, we've been here for a while, as Court just outlined. I think what's important to just understand a little bit is just the context of the coloring on these plans that you do see here today. That I'll talk about, I can kind of talk about the summaries at a very high level and just peruse through them and just note some of the assumptions and some of the intent of what you're looking at. So I have up on the screen right now, and I realize it's small, you do see the larger plan, so I'm just going to zoom in here. But what we're trying to convey here, and I just want to note that this is the MSFI recommendation, although it's not necessarily the MSFI recommendation because they didn't recommend bike lanes here. But in response to Councilor Bosley's request at the last meeting, was to look at really how does these bike lanes in each of these options affect the flexible space use of downtown that you see today. So just as you look at the colored lines here, I think that's important to note. You know, we looked at, and MSFI's recommendation was to maintain the curb line. So you can see basically the parking where it sits today. It's maintained. We added this bike lane, so that blue cyan color, or the first line next to the parking, is essentially 7 feet. So that's a 5-foot bike lane plus a 2-foot buffer area that we would see as minimally needed for a bike facility, a protected bike facility. The next yellow line, or that yellow band, would be that 8-foot walking sidewalk section. And again, that is a 6-foot sidewalk plus, again, a 2-foot buffer for flexibility if there's stuff within the space. And when I say that, stuff would be lights and benches and plantings, trees. All of the site, or call it sidewalk furniture if you want, would be in that. That remaining space, which is in that pinkish purplish color, or magenta, that is the remaining space that's left over. I could zoom into one area here in the plan, which is just opposite or right on the edge of Railroad Square, if you could see here. The black dash line, we worked with Public Works in the clerk's office to outline where the licensed use of space is now. So there's a dozen or so locations. So these are how the space is used today. So when we were looking at, what would the bike lane, what would the sidewalk panel have impact on each of these locations, the summary will summarize that, and we'll get to that. But I thought it was important, just so that you understood for each option, you could see a bike lane, you could see that clear yellow walking path, and then the remaining space. So in this case, you can see that where these two locations are today, they would have impact on at least the configuration of what you see there today. And we've also dimensioned, so this is 7 feet. And if I'm correct, I know that the license requirements require a minimum of 6 feet of space from building face to clear wall for use of a license. I think that's in your ordinance today. So we were just kind of basing that on that minimum requirement. You can see, again, this is just one example. If I look directly across the street, and this location is here today, there wouldn't be an impact along here. And again, this building is set back a little further along the west side of Main Street at Gilbo. So this should be Margaritas, that large area in here. So that would not have an impact based on how it's laid out today with this alternative. So in summary, I'm going to just jump to the summary page now. Each plan we put together, really kind of a high level, call it an executive summary if you want. We looked at downtown corridor operations, the intersection operations, crosswalks, tree impacts, and again, that flexible sidewalk space. We thought that was important. Of course, parking is critically important on all of these options, and if I'm looking at this as the benchmark, which is basically the existing condition, you can see that we've always talked about the 168 parking spaces. That's our starting point. That's existing today. Our goal was to, in some of these alternatives, is to maximize parking. So this is our benchmark. Our intersection level of service sketch is on here. You can see this is the existing intersection. You've seen these analyses before. We did break down the vehicle and bike levels of service for both the AM and PM, and that is a letter grade. That letter grade really relates to, and we can get into the traffic engineering if you'd like, but that letter grade really gets into the degree of the time of delay and the amount of queuing. So that is a combination. I'm happy to talk about that. But we also added in here the pedestrian levels of service, because that's really important too. And the manager just mentioned an issue about pedestrian safety, that double threat issue, that works into the condition. So you'll see variations in the pedestrian levels of services as you will with the vehicle and bike. So MSFI recommendation. I'm going to go to the next recommendation. Same analysis. And I'll just note here in the very south end, so in the south end, really south of Eagle in Emerald, there is some on-street parking along the east side, but then the other two panel sides is essentially the curb line a really wide grass strip, and then a narrow 5-foot sidewalk. So these sections from Emerald to south of Davis and down to Water Street on the east side, we looked at them, we've measured those out, but they're not really aligned the same way as getting north of Eagle. So when we do this, and again, I'll zoom out. And if I am going too fast, I know you've heard a lot from me on each of these options, but if I'm going too fast, just let me know and I'll slow down. But the ad hoc steering committee's recommendation that came out was maintaining a 4-lane Main Street, maintaining angled parking on the sides, included the Gilbo, as Court mentioned before. Each of the options did include the Gilbo Railroad Square crosswalk table for that visibility. And then this does include the compact roundabout. You'll recall that we had a number of conversations at all of the steering committee meetings and the public workshop meetings regarding the disposition of what could happen here along the top of Central Square. You saw options where we had a 5-leg intersection that was a roundabout, a 5-leg intersection that was a traffic signal, and then this hybrid model, which was essentially taking the existing intersection, and MSFI talked about that, and creating some opportunities to either improve pavement markings, maybe even reduce some pavement widths, but look at maintaining the operational control of how it is today. This option does include that open path, and it also looks at options to widen the sidewalk space. As most of you know, and I can zoom into this location here as an example, the Stage Restaurant has a long linear location right here that it uses for its space, and it's in conflict now with the existing. So a curb adjustment would be needed to solve some of those problems. When we looked at Central Square in each of these options, we were really predicated upon the lane work. When we get into the hybrid single lane, I'll go through a set of assumptions that we thought about and talked about throughout the course of the project. But I just wanted to, again, point out some impacts and what the condition is. I go back to the summary page on the mayor's ad hoc steering committee recommendation. Again, those same features. Downtown features a 4-lane Main Street with 2-lane side streets. It's generally maintaining where we are. We did remove the center median parking in this alternative, and that was really a function of the roundabout control. You do see that we would maintain Gilbo in a 2-way direction. It came out of the steering committee that way. It also came out of MSFI that way. So, and council, I think, reiterated that in one of its last meetings that while there may be benefit in the future, it was really thought to maintain 2-lane travel on Gilbo now, and maybe future changes could depend, predicated upon what development options might happen out there. I will note that each summary does have tree impacts. We note that the trees that are there will have some impact. In this summary, the Mayor's Ad Hoc Steering Committee recommendation was 57 trees to be removed based on construction. And I want to note that in each of the options, there's 14 trees that are in poor condition that we believe we would make the recommendation to remove them because they will struggle with the amount of work that needs to be done. And I also will note that while we've looked at the option layouts with respect to tree impacts, we haven't gone through a really detailed analysis on whether the additional impacts could come with the utility work. We do think that there would be some additional utility, but at the same time, depending on an alternative that the council wants to move for, we might be able to engineer around trees to save as many trees as possible with locations of the utilities. So, we have that option. So again, the flexible sidewalk space is looking at impacts to the current uses in the south end. When I say south end, south of Gilbo. North of Gilbo, really because it's widening out, has no impacts. So the uses today would stay the same with this option. And then Central Square, I say minimal to current uses because there are some minimal impacts in terms of the configuration, whether it's on the Court Street side or the Washington Street side. Certainly along the north side, we just saw that there would be some impacts there. The big note here, 154 spaces. So this is that 15 space difference that we've been talking about for the roundabout alternative. I'll move to the multi-lane hybrid option. So the multi-lane hybrid option, you've seen that. This was option 2 in the original set of options, which was maintaining that 4-lane Main Street. We looked at all 3 intersection types here. Well, and what came out of the steering committee was the roundabout option. But we looked at a 5-leg intersection, and this is, we call this the hybrid option, because this is the existing, the full existing intersection operation. So it's maintained the same way as it goes here. We took liberty at squeezing some of the pavement width down. And I just want to note that the inside of the common, we've measured that before, we presented that before, the inside of the existing common green area is about 17,450 square feet. If we look at this, I'll call it a road diet or a lane narrowing, and trying to make the pavements a little bit more efficient, we would probably gain maybe 7,000 square feet. So this could go up to about 25,000 square feet. So you'd be gaining some common area with this alternative. You know, you've got excessively wide pavements now. There's a lot of safety features that go with that. Narrower sidewalks, narrower crosswalks, I should say. We can position them better. I want to note here, because this was really important, and working with Public Works, clearly we identified the issue of the sidewalk panel in front of, and I'll call it the stage, but along the north face here. So we wanted to make sure that if we did anything to the curb line, even in this hybrid model, which is, again, the existing signal operation as it sits today, it was important for us to pull 20 feet off of the building face for flexible space in our sidewalk panel. And by doing that, we created a lot of room. We still have our bike, we still have all of our parking, and we have the 2 lanes of travelway before we touch the square. So we wanted to see what we could maximize and fit in here and try to address as many issues as we can. And we've done that. And I think there's good benefit to look here. And again, that's really good flexible use of space. The church gains a lot of space. The space along and with space allows you to address all of the irregularities that come with that. There's a lot of ADA compliance issues along that section, and this really addresses that note. You can see here that with a change in configuration along the Court Street side, you have that same benefit. It does have some operational impacts, as you can see. The actual use of the license areas right here lay out this way. So looking at, would these be positioned against the building, or how will that space, you're gaining a lot of space here on the intersection, and that's based on its trapezoidal shape, but that's still fitting in sidewalk panel, bike lane panel, and a lot wider approach on the flexible space. Very similar to Washington Street. Again, trying to hold that minimum 20-foot area. This is the area where Lucas is right now. That's that licensed area. And it does clip it ever so slightly right here. Maybe the solution is to make it a little longer so the net square foot area is the same. But I would say that would be under that minimal impact area. I'll go back to the summary sheet again. I think you're pretty familiar with this. Intersection levels of service, really comparable to what exists there today. There's not a lot of change. We're still looking at a 4-lane Main Street, still operating at a CD level, AM and PM, in our pedestrian levels of service. Again, because a part of levels of service for pedestrians is crosswalk length, the delay that it takes for somebody to cross the street, the multiple lanes, that threat, that does reduce the level of service. So you can see that this is really comparable to what exists today. This has 60 trees to be removed. So it went up a little bit based on, just based on layout. And again, 14 trees are impacted. The parking, this is good news. This is back to 169. So that's a gain of 1 space. We started with 168, and now we're able to gain 1 space net overall with this option. I'm sorry, I'm going to go to, let's make sure I have the right one. Okay. The single lane hybrid. So if I recall back at the November meeting where we presented, and actually even before that, this would have been option 3, the single lane option. We showed option 3 with several alternatives. If you recall, there was a multi-lane path, like a 10-foot wide path down the center. And then we showed it as green area. But you can see what we've done here is, again, we call it hybrid because, you know, we really heard a lot. We're trying to maintain that historic presence of the operation of the intersection. And this is the same option. This is the same alternative that you saw on the multi-lane. The single lane option now, you know, has 1 single 18-foot lane. And we talked about the concerns about, you know, what if it's 1 lane, what about trucks? And what about fire trucks? So delivery trucks on the side. We had a model, and unfortunately I didn't bring it up, but I can bring it up. But we have a model that shows those vehicles in the bypass capability on an 18-foot lane. We would think that that 18-foot travel lane, 1 single lane, would allow that to occur. You get a lot of double parking today with delivery trucks. You'd still have that capability with a single lane option. And we'll talk a little bit about how that operates. We did look at this, and this is what I would call a tree-lined plaza, parking plaza. This creates a lot of good opportunities. And again, with the change to single lane and not that double threat issue, I think it would be a lot safer to present or to bring parking back to the center median. And there's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, obviously, parking count becomes quite large by doing this, but also just the flexible space later on when the street closes. And if this, you know, if you would consider something that this would all be at grade without curb, then you have a really tree-lined plaza space for future events, which has, you know, a really strong connection right to here, which is your Gilbo Railroad raised crosswalk. So this ties in fairly well. I think it presents one of the safest alternatives, again, that double threat that the manager mentioned earlier, and we heard that a lot, crosswalk safety. So I'm gonna just jump back here to the single lane hybrid summary. I'll start with the really good news, 197 spaces, because you're adding parking spaces back to the system along the center. This has clearly a lot of parking benefit. And I know that that was an important, a real important element amongst all. The steering committee, MSFI, the general public, that was really a really big concern. It creates a 2-lane center, a 2-lane Main Street, as well as matching the 2-lane sidewalks. We certainly, our intersection options would be hybrid, and it would operate the same way. From a level of service, it's really the same. There's a little bit queuing length increases, but from this alternative to the existing alternative, and it's really just the presence of the stacking lanes that, as we've seen before, aren't really utilized in their maximum extent. So our queue lengths would grow a little bit on the Main Street delay, certainly within that 95th percentile, which is the worst 3 minutes of the hour, if we want to put it that way. Our pedestrian levels of service it improves pretty well. And again, that's a function of single lane, shorter crosswalks, better timing, and then certainly the benefits of the hybrid improvements along the central square really, I think, really pulls that in fairly well. 61 trees to be removed. Again, 14 are in poor condition. And this maximizes the flexible use side of the space. I mean, I think we're gaining, we've gained a lot of space in all areas. It wouldn't impact any of the current operations, and in fact, it would enhance any future additional operations. So I think the single lane option, obviously, it isn't, again, it's not the best vehicle bike levels of service because it's really comparable to what's there today versus, say, a roundabout that would change your vehicle environment. But from a walking pedestrian standpoint and a biking community standpoint, I think this offers really a safe and protected way to go. So those are essentially the four alternatives that are here today. And I do have a copy of the tree impact study, so if anybody wanted to see that in a little bit better detail, I'm happy to bring that up, but if there's any questions, sure.
All right, so we'll
Thank
get
you,
into
Ed.
the discussion about what to do and how to move forward a little bit later, but to keep this organized, are there any questions specifically related to the options and taking advantage of our technical people here? I'm going to start with Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mayor. I just have a couple, I would like to see, I know you mentioned you had the diagram of the single lane having folk pass on there. I would love to see that if that's an option. And then also on the single lane piece, it shows blowing into 2 lanes as you come around the circle, just understanding what the intent of those 2 lanes are. Right there, yep.
Right on Court Street?
Yeah, and what the traffic flow would be around those 2 lanes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we tried to emulate what's there today. So there's a free right turn. We made that a little bit shorter because capacity-wise, it's much larger than it really needs to be today, based on the number of right turns. So we've maintained that short right turn pocket. This is your through lane, and we wanted to stack a few cars making that left turn. So it really operates essentially the same way. We've probably narrowed it down a little bit. We are, kind of pinching up against the existing condition here, but we're stacking back into this area where it stacks back today. That 95th percentile, that rough 3 minutes, we see queuing back to Winter Street today. You'll probably see that. You'll probably still see that here, just because of the signals. Now, what we tried to do with the traffic signal is optimize that. So, industry standard, the yellow cycle, the all red cycle, the time involved in that, the time involved in the exclusive pedestrian crossing. And keep in mind that we kept it exclusive as it operates today, which actually takes, again, time away from the cycle, but we thought it was important to emulate or at least model what you have today as that baseline. Does it improve it? I think it might marginally improve it, but it certainly adds a lot better use in lane alignment.
So you can think of and we've talked about this before, as you're talking about a signalized intersection, you can think of it as a pie. You dedicate certain size pieces to each particular activity and movement that you want to do. And as Ed described, just so you know, today there's a slice of time for dedicated pedestrian crossing, slice of time for north-south movements, east-west movements, to make it work. Certainly, newer signals will allow for more options, but again, I think as Ed has indicated, it's not going to substantially change what the feeling is and how the intersection operates today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Giacomo?
Thank you, Your Honor. My question is regarding the tree loss. We had a whole bunch of the different tree losses for each of the 4 different options there. What I'm curious about is I know in some of the designs that were presented last year in the early phases of this, the visualizations that you provided had additional trees in there. Do you have the net loss of trees for the different options? That's the number that are being removed in these. But do we have the net number that would be lost?
Not yet, because part of the challenge is designing what do you want to have for that configuration going down the street. I mean, part of the discussion has been, well, we don't want to impact sort of that commercial space. Well, if you put a tree there, that's going to impact the commercial space there. So that's the next step, is to start figuring out those, as Ed mentioned earlier, where are we going to put benches, where are we going to put stormwater treatment areas, where are we going to put some additional trees? Because all that will take up space. So I don't have a net yet, because it's difficult with not having a more defined design.
All right, thank you, Mayor. If I can follow up real quick. Okay, and then the next, I assumed that certainly with any of the options that are winnowing out that center lane right now where the parking is, I'm assuming that at least, I counted 30 trees down the center median there would probably be part of the 60 or 50, depending on those different options. Couldn't quite figure out where the rest of them are. I see a bunch of X's on trees on this. I'm guessing that's answering my question.
That's answering your
Perfect,
question.
thank you. That's it.
Okay, I was gonna continue up this way, but we can start back here. Counselor Mosley.
So just staying with the tree questions, in that center median for the multi-lane hybrid option, does that median provide enough width for plantings? Because I can see that we're probably removing a lot of plantings in there. Are we able to regain tree line in that space? Does that accommodate that?
Yeah, so again, what you're seeing here is the positioning of the trees, the multi-lane hybrid option, because it's a road pavement, you're gonna see all these trees would be removed. There's two that would be, this is a 10-foot wide proposed island, so that really creates a nice planting regime.
So we can-
And we would imagine that all that would be lined with new trees. Yeah.
Counselor Greenwald.
Can you flip to the multi-lane hybrid picture, please? Turn on.
Okay.
It's on. Come on. So if I understand, that removes all the parking from the middle. It gets replaced elsewhere. Can you give me some information of where the elsewhere is?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's
So.
question number one. I've got two others.
So one of the things is, some of the existing parking layouts just really inefficient. So we've standardized all the spaces. So we're able to gain some there. But the block here, and if you look at your summary, on your summary will show you where we're gaining a lot. We actually reduced this block from 4 crosswalks to 3. We thought 4 was excessive. So by doing that, we're gaining a lot of spaces that are here. Let me zoom in a little bit better. You know, you've got this island blocked out here on both sides of the street, so we're really gaining a lot between Emerald, Eagle, and Gilbo along this block, along both sides. As I said, most of the parking layout, you know, we've applied a really consistent layout. All spaces meet current standard, all the handicap spaces meet standards. Some of the spaces that are out there now are just like residual leftover spaces, so they're, some are short, some are wide, and yeah, I think that's where the numbers are coming from.
Okay. Well, relating to what's out there now, and I'll call it the brilliance of the 1980 plan, it was bringing the green in the midst of the parking, and this is eliminating it. Maybe yes, maybe no, but it really is a loss of a lot of green. Specifically, a question, if you could slide down a little bit towards the square. Just wondering, someone's driving down Court Street and wants to go Washington Street. Is that going to work? Because I see that little island thing is gone.
Yeah, we did and again, that could be restored. We were trying to maximize the space of green. That movement, that free movement could still go, but they would get into this left turn lane, and either their left turn lane to Roxbury or that left turn lane to return to Court. So that operation still sits there
It
today.
works. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Counselor Chadbourne.
Thanks. I'm going to assume, since we're no longer in a formal council meeting and it's a workshop, that we don't have to stand, so.
We need you for the mic, apparently.
What's that?
I guess we need you to stand for the mic
For
so
the mic?
everybody can hear.
Okay. So, Court, I'm going to ask you a historical question. Back in 1986, there was a very generous donation made by a couple who lives here, for all the trees downtown, $300,000 to deposit, plant these trees. And I don't know if it's public who that is, that's why I'm hesitant to.
They're all, if you go downstairs, all the donors to the Memorial Tree Fund are on the leaves that are outside of the entryway as you come into the City Hall. So I would say all the donors are public.
Okay. I never noticed that.
You never noticed that? So
That little
take a few
detail.
moments some point and you can see all the people who participated in that.
So I'm thinking of our history as
Mhm.
Tree City, and this tells us what we're going to lose as
Mhm.
trees, but it doesn't necessarily mean, or we shouldn't assume that we can't replace trees perhaps in different places, right?
Correct.
So I had the same reaction as Councilor Greenwald in terms of green space,
Mhm.
because that is actually part of the master plan as well.
Yes.
And one of the things that attracts people to Keene, downtown, is the quality of life, and
Mhm.
part of that quality of life is the relationship that we have with nature. So it would be important to me that we incorporate that, so I just want to know that that is potentially, this is just about removal, it's not about,
Correct. We were
Okay.
trying to give you a kind of a benchmark for, because people look at the existing trees, et cetera, benchmark of what will remain and what will need to go. You've heard me talk about some general conditions anyhow. The emerald ash borer, et cetera, is also taking its toll. But no, the intent is, I'm sure, because that's what makes our downtown attractive, is that those spaces that have that have the landscaping. And I guess you can think of it this way. You've heard us talk about that purple magenta area. That's basically the space you would use to do that greening. So and that's where this is, again, back to where it's difficult for myself to be able to tell you exactly what it looks like, because again, you have competing interests. You have competing interests for the commercial activity that may be in a location, and then you have the competing interests of wanting to put that landscaping, et cetera, out there. That will be another, I'm going to say, that is going to be another iteration once we choose the direction here. That will be the next iteration of sitting down and begin looking at those issues of, okay, understanding we would love to have 20 feet for commercial activity, but maybe we end up taking 10 feet of it for landscaping. So that will, and I think this community is going to making sure that those priorities exist, is making sure that we have that landscaping, because that's why people come. They want to sit not just in an open space with sidewalks all around them. They're looking for that broken up space, the trees, the landscaping, et cetera.
so following on that, if I may, at that point, once we decide on the configuration, is when we would be discussing the lighting as well?
Oh, absolutely, again, absolutely. I think and going back to, as we've been presenting this project over time, this is a stepped iterative process. Right now, we are in the concept preliminary, meaning that we're choosing sort of that general footprint of what we would like to do. Once we've accomplished that, then we go away for a while and we start doing that more detailed work. Then we would come back and through various activities, present out that next level of work, which is going to be this landscaping furniture, to get that feedback saying, yeah, this is good here. Same thing with lighting. And I'm really appreciative, for example, this evening from the Heritage Commission, because as I mentioned to the council before, again, the intent is to consult with those entities to make sure that as we're selecting things, it fits what we want it to say. But I can't go there yet because I don't have a concept.
All right, Counselor Workman?
Your Honor. I just wanted to point out with the multi-lane hybrid option, although we are losing that green space in the middle a bit, we're also adding the green space to the square. So we're still intentional with having green space being important to us. So I like this model. Thank you.
And be thinking about it, I mean, again, this is where you're now starting to kind of move into the next phase of sort of looking at things. That middle space will have green, but it may not be as emphasized as the green on the sides. Back to, if you think about it architecturally, oh my God, I'm sounding like a planner, that you have your buildings that are up to a certain size. Now you're gonna bring down that next level of treatment, which is gonna be probably your larger trees, et cetera. In the middle, you're probably not gonna go as high, maybe 14, 15 feet, because again, remembering, we wanna keep that image. If you're standing down there by the post office, walking up that way, that image of looking up Main Street and seeing the common, the church, et cetera, that image there. So it's doing it. The other thing we've also been talking about is, for example, our stormwater. We're thinking that potentially, instead of having stormwater go off to the sides towards the buildings, maybe we'll do the street stormwater towards the middle and do those bioretention and those sort of treatments there in the middle, use that space in that particular fashion. But that's green. So again, there's a lot coming, and that's what, and I think the next phase will be the next exciting phase.
Councilor Ormerod?
Thank you, Mayor Hansel. I will have a question about the comparison of the multi-lane versus the single-lane hybrid option. I noticed on the single lane, you still park on both sides of the road, which, as a driver, is a little maddening when you're looking left to right all the time, or if you're trying to back out. So it occurs to me, it seems that the double lane option is a little bit safer because all the parking is on one side. I'm wondering if that's really reflected in your analysis.
You want to start with that, or?
Yeah, no, I will. Part of the model that we include, particularly along Main Street, is there's a lot of data that go into that, including parking. So one assumption that we made was that there's parking interference at least 10 times an hour, and we picked that, so that's just interaction with vehicles and parking cars moving in a particular section of the quarter. There could be two cars, one at the north end and south end still, but conclusively, that's a data set that we use. So we take into consideration that piece. The reason why I'm more comfortable with parking along this center median here in a single lane is that you're right, you do have cars on both sides, but you have a managed traffic flow now. And it's a slower traffic flow. You have a single lane operation. And as you're approaching the intersection, so that's from the southbound perspective, if you're approaching the intersection on the northbound approach, you do have a traffic signal there that manages the traffic flow a bit. Not to say that there aren't people that, that lunatic fringe that we always mention, that person that's driving really fast. It does turn into a 2-lane, but it's an approach zone, which intuitively would be much slower. So I do think that the advantage here is that the single-lane approach minimizes that conflict, at least from the perspective of you might be on an inside lane, and the outside lane is where the parking interference might be coming, and somebody might sweep out pretty wide, and you'd be blind to that. And I think that the single lane improves that conflict issue.
And I think, again, Ed hit it from an operational standpoint, and that's what again, we look at, is that single lane requires everyone to basically stop or slow down. So you're not having somebody trying to cut around a vehicle to because someone is backing out. So again, back to the safety or safer conditions. Again, we have to split it to 2 lanes as you head there into Central Square because we're trying to line the traffic up for those who are going around to going on West Street or up Court Street and up Marsh Street, and hopefully that single lane coming up to basically that point just north of Church Street. Again, that's keeping traffic slower than what it is today, because today, as you all know, people get into that eastbound lane coming north, everyone's there, no one's in the westbound lane, so cars will zip out and speed up along that. This single lane coming just up to there should reduce that operational concern because there's just not that same great distance.
Councilor Filio?
I'm going to the multi-lane hybrid, if you can more zoom in on Central Square. Now, currently, our fire apparatus egresses coming down Washington Street into the central square. Currently, right now, there's plenty of room. As we know, there's a little extra room. The way that I show the design here and the way the new island is, you're seriously diminishing the room where fire apparatus can enter. If there's one lane coming up, and even if traffic stops, there's nowhere for them to go. Has that been taken into consideration?
Yeah, I think the lane arrangements, and even the positioning of the island, if this is the direction that council wants to go, I think we'll refine that. And we'll refine that operation with the fire chief to make sure that we know that they do use that. Again, it's an all-stop condition, so presumably, even if, as they approach and the Opticom signal goes into an all-stop condition, there wouldn't be any traffic moving, only potentially somebody pulling out of a parking space, of course, but they would have that multiple lane. This island, and again, we like to narrow that, but maybe that island is not raised, but that edge is a mountable island, so a fire truck could go by if extra width was needed. I think those are all design
Has the
details.
fire chief been discussed on this particular proposal with the reduced area of apparatus entry?
Again, we haven't had discussions in detail with the fire department, because if this is not a concept chosen, we're doing it. And I think, as Ed has indicated, this is a concept. We haven't come up with what the final size of anything is yet. So that size right now is just what we feel could fit. We don't even have to have an island there if we end up deciding not to.
Okay. Second question, same thing. Looking at in front of 38 and 42 Central Square, if you can zoom in, it shows outdoor seating for all of your restaurants, and it appears there that that outdoor seating would be eliminated because it would be in the way of the sidewalk. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's be eliminated or pushed up against the building. Part of the, back to, again, what we have today with these landscape islands, et cetera, and only 6 feet between the face of the building, in some cases the landscape island, the merchants have no choice but to go further out. If we have, back to this wider space, now potentially instead of locating away from the face of the building, they could move up against the face of the building and use that as your space, and you're walking through. Again, part of the exercise here was just to demonstrate and show sort of what's there today. And I know that's the hard part. We have a current configuration out there that exists. What you have to do is picture basically all that gone. And now, what are you putting back? So like I said, going back to, I think it was Councilor Workman's question and Councilor Chadbourne's about landscaping, et cetera. Those are the decisions we're going to have to make next, is where do you put the landscaping? Maybe we put none there, which means then you got that entire width to put stuff up in.
Okay, one last question or statement. Same thing on the common, on the southern tip of it, where you said where we expanded it out, but you're thinking it possibly could go back. Wouldn't it make more sense to allow that slip lane, to allow traffic instead of backing traffic up, to allow a slip lane to be able to come down Court Street and go up Washington Street without stopping at a red light? Wouldn't it make sense to keep the traffic flowing?
Again, it can. Right now, having a free flow does create conflicts if you watch people out there as the difference, as the traffic is being released coming northbound. So again, that is totally changeable at this point in time. This is just an image that just says this is sort of the most that you could do, versus, hey, if we want to put a slip lane back in there, you can put a slip lane back in there.
Thank you.
Anybody for the first time? Councilor Lake?
Thank you, Your Honor. Quick question on the plaza-style parking down the median. Where, if you were to park in the middle, where would you expect to cross over to the sidewalk there? Would you just get out and cross, or would you have to shimmy down either alongside the road or in between the cars to get to a crosswalk?
You see these two large blockouts right here. There would be a crosswalk here and a crosswalk here, and there'd likely be a center path connected between the two.
Okay.
And that center walkway would allow you to go all the way to the tabled area down here, or cross at either one of these locations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Madison.
Thank you.
For the multi-lane hybrid option, that center median going down Main Street, how wide would that be? How much area are we
10 foot
looking
roughly.
at?
This is about a 10-foot between where it's widest, which is in the north, so between West Roxbury and Gilbo. This is a 10-foot island that we're showing. And then we're increasing the island size here. You can see the old island, it's about a foot. So this is I believe this is a 6-foot island here on the south side. We wanted to establish that as a minimum.
Okay, so about 10 foot would be from me to about Councilor Roberts, is what I'm guessing. So we could hypothetically repopulate that with landscaping or trees.
Well, absolutely, like I said,
or
absolutely.
Lots of other options.
Yeah, there are lots of things you could do there, again, to, provide that feel that you want to present there. But in this case, this is not a space for people, so the people would not be going over into this space.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Totally unrelated to trees this time. This one, as I see on both the hybrid models, we're running into some of the same concern that I had with the models when they were proposed the first time, which was brought up by actually a constituent who works downtown. The angle of the parking has changed, and that's how we're fitting more spots in some of those places. And that is concerning because if we're also narrowing the lane widths, you have a steeper backing up to get out of that spot, which means it's harder to make the turn, which means you need to pull out farther. Looking at the distance, the length of those, if you're driving a vehicle that's longer than, say, about 14 feet or so, you're pretty much cutting into both lanes of traffic trying to back out of one of those spots between Railroad and is it Eagle or Cypress or whatever it is, the next one up there. Eagle, or Cypress, yeah. So those ones now, and actually Cypress all the way to Eagle, all of those spots, if you look at the old lines, now they're the new lines. That's a really steep back out in order to get into that lane, and I worry that you're gonna not just impede the one lane, you're actually gonna impede the other lane as well with those. And that was the first thing I noticed with the parking here, is it's nice we're getting more spots by making them steeper and tucking them in a little bit better, but I do worry about that.
And certainly, I think, certainly concerned, but right now, the standard parkings are 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90. Those are the standard configurations for parking, and each configuration provides a slightly different advantage to them. Like I said, the lines out there today, unfortunately, have just sort of, over time, sort of been created. So again, you're back to just the way it is, and that people have gotten used to. So many communities, other places, again, stay with the 60 and 45. And if we're attempting to, again, slow things down with the various options, that side conflict is all part of that.
Okay, Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually had a similar concern, but then I noticed on that same issue, we're actually getting less steep further up. So, and by going to consistent,
same.
telling me that the fact that we can handle it in front of, call it the prime roast block there, where we're getting actually less steep, and even in there, that would be like the Muse and Hannah Grimes block, we're actually getting less steep, and that's consistent across, and you're making a consistent angle is what I'm looking at.
It's a consistent, right. What
So-
you're looking at is, you're looking at, again, the underlying, unfortunately, the underlying lines do vary that much, so what you're seeing here is a consistent, is it 60?
60.
It's a consistent 60-degree parking angle.
So we would be somewhere in between the difficulty of backing out of Muse and the difficulty of backing out of where we have a Modest Man in that area now. Okay, thank you.
Further technical questions on the 4 options? Yes, Councilor Powers?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just as we begin to look at all of these, what's the standard that's being used for each one of them for the width of the bicycle path? 5 and 2 and 2, or 6, 2 and 2?
It's 5 plus 2, a 5-foot bike lane plus a 2-foot buffer. So you're seeing the blue strip is 7 feet in
Okay.
dimension.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other technical questions on the 4 options at this time? Yes, Councilor Workman?
Oh, I turned my mic off. Thank you. In the yellow section where the buffer zone, can we add plantings or anything, or does it have to remain empty to be considered a buffer zone? I've seen
That's the
some
sidewalk
models
area.
that
Yeah.
have raised planters.
Mhm.
as dividers in that area. So could we do something like that if we chose?
So we showed the sidewalk space, the yellow space at 8 feet. And we wanted that minimum 6-foot walking, a clear path, just to be ADA compliant. That remaining 2 can be a combination of whatever. It could be a raised planter. It could be a raised planter, in this case, straddling 2 feet along the yellow line and 2 feet into the magenta line. We said you have all that flexibility and those final design details, because you do have planters today that are out there that are pretty substantial and they're really nice. And some of the options, they're not disturbed by either the bike lane or even the walking path. So, I mean, whatever your final option would be, then you can start looking at, do you want a 4-foot raised planter for larger trees, planting beds, flanking, your benches on either end of that, whatever those design details, I think come into the final design realm, but that's where that would reside.
Yeah, so they do not have to stay empty. It just has to be that wide to have a buffer zone.
Right, we think of it this way from a access mobility, we need a 6-foot line. So we have 8 foot here plus the other, so nothing doesn't say you can't meander a little bit, but you need to, again, maintain that open width so that your multiple types of mobility capability users can get down it. So again, this is the hard part on the concept here. This is very linear right now. Once you start moving to the next level, things are going to soften. You can do, again, some interesting things with some curvatures, things like this, as you move down through our main street and up down through the main street. And again, a lot of that is going to be in those discussions about sort of what's the priority in a particular area. But this is just very linear to try to at least help you kind of visualize these spaces.
Further technical questions, Councilor Roberts?
We're looking at all these different scenarios. We're talking about bike lanes. It's easy to have, to control, to find out exactly what the traffic flow is at any time. But when I was looking at some of the things like the 2013 Keene State College study, we like to call the bike path, which is actually a trail path, but what it showed that the vast majority of the people that were using that were people who were walking. A lot of people who use the trail path right now, I noticed they walk to go down to the co-op. Okay. So do we have a good idea of how many people use their bikes downtown and what times of the day they use their bikes?
I think anybody hadn't left. I think there has been some studies or some work that's been done by the Bicycle Pedestrian Path that is part of this work to kind of begin benchmarking what's being done today. Back to the challenge you all have is, what is your expectation for the future? Today, what's happening is because of what is available for people to use today. You have gone through a very intensive rezoning and reworking of your code, wanting to have more live, work, play in the downtown area. What is the expectations of those folks? How are they going to move around? You're looking for folks to be using their vehicles less. What is going to be their alternative if they're not going to use their vehicles to get around? So I think we do have some information about a baseline of what's happening today. I think what you're looking at right now is you're looking at saying, what are you anticipating occurring into the future? And it's not necessarily a year or 2 years from now. It's sort of like what downtown is today. Back in 1988, they did all this work with an expectation of, well, what's downtown going to be like in 2008? And I think if most of us are going to say they did a pretty good job because of what we see there today and the activities we are. question now is, I think these facilities, et cetera, what are they going to change? Not necessarily what they're going to keep the same.
Okay.
Can I just add something to that? I just want to note that we did count pedestrians, bicycles,
Yes.
and vehicles in the traffic study. So, and the traffic study is online, so you can see that. I will say that the count, is lower than one would expect. And maybe that's a function of the lack of facility, but I think that the overall count is in the hundreds per day, and that peak hour would probably be in the dozens per day. I don't know the exact number, but it is in the study. We did count the bikes, yeah.
Further technical questions? All right. Thank you. So the
Thank
next,
you.
the next phase, I think we're good
We'll
with
be
you
out back if you
right
have any
now.
further questions.
Thank you. Oh, Counselor Johnson, sorry. I couldn't see Counselor Johnson, but Counselor Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. First of all, I'm impressed as how you included all this. Before it just seemed hopeless when we were talking about bike lanes. But the way you've put this together, it's not hopeless. And I know the many constituents that got in touch with me really were concerned about those bike lanes, and I understand that. So I guess I'm giving you an affirmative all the way through because you've worked very hard to try to meet all these different requests and needs. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. That's a good segue into the next phase, which is to try to get this down to eventually an option that you can agree on. But I think a good goal for tonight and for the next phase of our discussion is to think about options that you prefer or options that you would prefer not to have on the table anymore. And we can start to winnow this down potentially to maybe one clear preference or maybe two clear preferences or maybe whatever comes out. So I would open it up to the floor for counselors to probably state your preference would be the easiest way to do it, and we can try to move ahead. Councilor Filio.
Just a couple of comments. One, I do see a couple things in the multi-lane hybrid option that I think would work combined with what came out of the MSFI recommendation. But with that said, I do want to hear, from everybody else. But one comment I do want to make, and for the other councilors to think about, is no matter what we decide on, if we whittle it down to 2, we whittle it down to 3, whatever, I would highly recommend that whatever we come down with or come up with, this does go back to committee. The reason for that isn't just so the 5 of us can have our way with it. It's we've all had our chance to ask questions, and we'll have to have more to ask tonight. The public hasn't had a chance to ask the questions. They've watched us ask the questions, but if I was sitting out there in the general public, there's probably a ton of questions I'd want to ask. So whatever we come up with, whatever concept we come up with, and I know you said the public's had plenty of chances to speak, so one more chance isn't going to hurt. Whatever we come up with, let's send it back to our constituents and let them see it and let them ask questions at a committee meeting. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Bosley, I'd ask the public to refrain. Councilor Bosley.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I'm just going to jump in and get us started. My preference is for the multi-lane hybrid option. I think maintaining the historical integrity of the square is very important to me. I feel like the narrow widths provide the safest environment for pedestrian crossings. And looking at the lower Main Street south of the square, the single lane hybrid option just doesn't feel as easy for the growth of this community, the traffic flow. And I don't particularly care for that parking in the center. I feel like it's problematic. People would be backing out into a standing lane that's waiting to pull through the light and just stuck waiting in their spots, which happens now on the Momentum side. I try to avoid parking there at all costs because it's such a hassle. So for me, the entire plan works. I like that bike lanes fit in this scenario, but if we chose to not have bike lanes, that would give us even a greater expanded sidewalk area that we would have for multi-purpose use, which is great. So I think we should have that conversation as well. Just because the bike lanes are shown in each of these designs doesn't mean that they need to remain there. Those are, that option, all of these options could be reviewed without them.
Council Workman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I also favor, I already said it, the multi-lane hybrid option. I feel this way for a couple of different reasons. It gives us a perfect compromise. I've said it over and over again at all the workshops. We're not going to appease everybody, but this comes pretty darn close to it. We lose no parking, it's just reconfigured. We have bike lanes on the sidewalk level. If for some reason down the road we realize we made a horrible mistake, we just expand our sidewalks and take them back. We include our traffic calming measures are added. We have shorter crosswalks. There's no roundabout, which was an option many people favored. There's a slight increase to the square size without significantly changing the traffic pattern or losing any historical character of the square. And we have more narrow sidewalk streets. Again, this really, I commend Stantec for bringing this to us. I wish this was the model. We would have saved a lot of time if I saw this in January. I would have said, yes, let's do it. So this is what I've been looking for and waiting for months. So thank you, and I hope fellow councilors agree.
Thank you. Councilor Madison.
Thank you, Your Honor. Initially, when I was on the ad hoc committee, the recommendation that came out of that committee was my preferred option. I have named it the Eye of Sauron because of the roundabout. You know, hearing some of the public comments, you know, it doesn't seem like the expanding Central Square to the church is very popular. So at this point, I'm pretty in favor of the multi-lane hybrid option. I like the center green strip. Those parking spaces in the center of Main Street are a public nuisance at best. It terrifies me whenever I drive down in my work truck. It's terrifying. So I'm going to support the multi-lane hybrid option. At this point, I would strongly recommend my fellow councilors do the same. Thank you.
All right, Councilor Williams.
I support the single-lane hybrid option, although multi-lane is acceptable to me. What I like about the single-lane option is that it is the most pedestrian-friendly, not having to cross multiple lanes at once. You know, we heard earlier, and I was reminded of an experience I had last week where we were driving up, and it was the two-lane situation where you know, somebody's crossing the street and there's a car, and so you can't see the person in front of that car. So you got to slam your brakes on really late to let that pedestrian that you can't see pass. And that's a problem that goes away with the single lane option. And in general, it makes the crossings not so far, much closer. I like that a lot. I like the changes to the Central Square. I liked what Jeff Speck had brought to us a couple weeks ago, a bit better. That doesn't seem to be on the table now, but I hope some of his ideas are in our minds, that you know, we do want to be as pedestrian friendly as possible. I think the single lane option provides that.
Councilor Greenwald.
Thank you. Well, I had a whole two-page speech that I'm not going to. You know, some of it was a lot of attitude that was pretty aggressive. But I like this presentation that's going on. I had a couple of real priorities, non-negotiables, I'll call them, that the square remained with minor modifications. So we checked that box. No loss of parking. Well, this multi-lane hybrid option seems to check that box too. Also makes me wonder, I'm not going to go there, but the MSFI proposal with modifying the side parking, we could get over 200 spaces out of that. But no, I'm not going to break that mud. Maintain the sidewalk width for dining and merchant use. Multi-lane seems to do that. The bike lanes, it's an interesting thing. I am now an electric bike rider, so I'm coming around, I could do it. Recently, this past week, I was in Manhattan, where they have very dedicated bike lanes, and they have electric bikes on there. The electric motorcycles, the Class 3 ones, that's a nightmare. So I just want to make it very clear, we're going to have to deal with the speed of bicycles, electric bikes, what have you. Mine, you have to pedal. You still have to be reasonable when you're doing it, but this is going to be an issue of blending pedestrians, bicycles, and cars. So just to kind of throw it out there. A lot of people that ride bikes are not responsible bike riders. We need to deal with that. And ultimately, if I understand the at-grade bike lane, if it doesn't work, there's no loss. If it does work, okay, great. It's all wonderful, because all the other priorities to me are there, so it's good. But I do want to make something real clear with the procedure going on this evening. I'm optimistic and hopeful that a recommendation, a consensus will come out of this, which will be referred to MSFI, where the public can also address it. Recommendation, get back to the usual way of doing council business. Recommendation to the council for the last meeting in July. To accomplish this, I'm open for calling it a special MSFI meeting, perhaps changing date with PLD, or do it like we used to do, have them both on the same night. But definitely the public needs to weigh in on this. You want the night off.
Okay. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you kindly. I too am leaning toward the hybrid option of the double lanes. Listening to my fellow councilors, they pretty well had just said it. I like the checking of the boxes, Councilor Greenwood. I think that just a good job has been done, and that's where I would take a vote, right there. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Ormerod.
Thank you, Mayor Hansel. I still have been debating the two hybrid options. And I think I hear what the model of the single lane is trying to do. That's the advantage that we were told is actually safer because traffic is slower. I have a hard time putting my mind around that because you still have traffic and parking coming from both directions, and it may be slower because you don't know where to look when you're driving, and you don't know where to look when you're crossing. So I'm pretty firmly in the camp of the multi-lane hybrid option at this point.
Okay. Councilor Roberts.
The city engineer said that we're supposed to be looking for what's going to be best for the city 20 to 30 years from now. If people have been reading one of the results of the pandemic, small cities around the country are dying because people are just not going downtown anymore. Too many people are working at home, so they're not going to restaurants and businesses. What was brought up here that was so different was the fact that we had the ability to expand, like the fellow councilwoman over there said. Okay, why give 5 feet to a bike when we're talking about over a course of the day, you might get 10 or 15 bicyclists an hour? If that 5 extra feet can be expanded into walkway and to give the businesses the ability to attract more customers, more diners, that's what's going to bring the people downtown. That's going to keep the people downtown spending more money, going one place, okay, I may go to Hannah Grimes, then I may go out and sit out and have a lunch, okay? Those are the type of people that will develop and be the economic engine. Had a bad day today, so now I'm good. Would be the economic engine to help the city go and help keep downtown at a vibrant place. Because even right now, we'll pick on the poorhouse and we'll pick on Lucas. Even when you go out there, you don't have much room to travel by. If you go by Margaritas, where you have that extended 4 or 5 feet, people can go both ways, be comfortable. Poorhouse, Lucas, I have to stop and let someone go by, or I have to go out past the curbway on the other side of the grass-raised island. So if I'm looking at what's best for the future of Keene, where it's going to be like the next 20 years, it isn't going to be people biking downtown. We're not going to build more apartments downtown. We're restricted on what we can do. So I'm not going to support giving up 5 to 7 feet for bike lanes when I can give up 5 to 7 feet to businesses and pedestrians.
Counselor, if there was an option, because the bike lanes could be removed from any of these options,
Yep.
is there one that you would prefer if the bike lanes were removed?
Yeah, the hybrid 2, the hybrid 4.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Counselor Giacomo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, I respect Councilor Roberts and his thoughts on this. I do think it's a little bit backwards, though, and I think some of us have been saying this all along, is that the reason that we don't have a lot of cyclists downtown is because you can't cycle downtown. That's the whole point. That's why we don't have a lot of cyclists. That's why the counts are so low. We don't have no facilities for them other than riding in traffic. So I saw the different options that were offered up. I voted in the initial poll a year and a half ago. Whenever that first poll came out, I voted in that, and my views have changed a little bit over the time. However, I find it interesting that the Energy and Climate Committee didn't actually issue any kind of proposal for this, because if we want to look at this from an environmental perspective, we want to look at this from the perspective of for the safety of our constituents, both pedestrians and automotives, then I'm a data person. That's all I care about. The data all says roundabout, period. Zero question. Federal Highway Administration, 37% reduction in overall collisions, 75% reduction in injury collisions, 90% reduction in fatalities, and 40% reduction in pedestrian. What is clear in almost every roundabout application is that roundabouts are safer for motorists than signalized intersections, and at a 4-way intersection, at least 32 possible vehicle-to-vehicle conflicts, all the different ways you can turn. Ours is even more complex than that, because it's a 5-way. At a 4-way roundabout, there are only 8. For ours, I think there's about 12 or 13, I believe, for a roundabout here. So from a safety perspective, if we care about the safety of the people who are walking around our downtown, we are not really improving much from a safety perspective back down there. We have a stoplight, and people are going to accelerate to get through that stoplight. They do it now. They do it every single day. They do it at least every 5-10 minutes. Someone is trying to catch that light. That's when pedestrians are going to get killed down there. Yes, we didn't have any fatalities from 2019 to 2022, as the report shows. That's really nice. That's good. Not having dead constituents is a very good thing, and I'd like to keep it that way. And we have an option that is clearly safer, and yet everyone is veering away from it now, which is interesting. And I don't think this hybrid 2-lane or hybrid 1-lane, we've seen pieces of it come forward before. Some of the study that was done on it showed a lot of the timing studies. They had some of the average queue times, which brings me to the Energy and Climate Committee. it's interesting to me that they didn't issue any kind of a proposal, because the average queue time, if you calculate based on the number of cars per day that are coming through there, you're talking about 54 hours a day of idling, total cars down there, as opposed to a roundabout, which is roughly half that. So you're talking about increased emissions, talking carbon dioxide being pumped into our downtown, and this is not important, apparently, because all the options that we're proposed tonight, except for the roundabout option, do nothing for our traffic lights down there. They keep the traffic lights intact, and if anything, we're actually increasing the queue lengths on some of these options, the single lane option. And the double lane, we have some data on it, but we don't actually have the queue time data. So it's interesting because we are making a less environmentally friendly decision right now, it sounds like, and we're making a less safe decision. So it's interesting to me the way that people's priorities work. I'm not sure where the priorities are. Is it parking? That's what we care about then? So safety, environmental, those matter less than parking. It's interesting prioritization here. So I have what my priorities are, and this is a smoother option. It is a less costly option, roughly half the cost to operate a roundabout in an average year versus a lighted intersection. If you account for delay time as the values that were given by the Highway Administration, they're estimating roughly $950,000 per year in lost time. If you take the time out, it's $134,000 a year for a signalized intersection, for this signalized intersection to operate, versus $64,000 for a roundabout. So that's $70,000 a year from our constituents that they're going to pay to have a light down there and to have a little more parking. I really think that our priorities should be focusing on things that I think probably matter more than immediacy. We're not going to get funding, of course, for things that don't have bike lanes in it. That's much is pretty clear. So I think my proposal is I prefer the roundabout option. I think it hits all the things that we need to be doing here, and I think it's more forward-thinking. We're not trying to build for 1980 anymore. We're trying to build for 2080. So let's have a proposal that does that.
All right, thank you. Hold on. I was going to see if anybody would speak for the first time. Councilor Lake.
Thank you, Your Honor. I know I've stated previously that I too support roundabouts, but I would prefer there just to be a large one out there with no stoplights in the current configuration. But regardless, I would say that I do prefer the hybrid options. I think the multi-lane makes the most sense. There's a lot about the single lane that jumps out to me, like the parking increases, but I certainly understand the concerns around safety with having parking on both sides of a one-lane road. So I'd be leaning towards the multi-lane hybrid.
All right. And before we get into too much discussion, I mean, I've been sitting there listening like everybody else. You got the multi-lane hybrid option seems to have a lot of support. Another option has been brought up as preferred, but that doesn't seem, no one else really brought that up. So can we move this forward? Does anyone want to argue for keeping an option other than C sort of in the running? I'll put it that way. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can we make sure we're on the same page? Hybrid, multi-lane, 2 north, 2 south, but the parking is gone, right? Is that correct?
In the middle.
In the middle. Well, it's not there. It's not in the middle. Okay? All right. So, good.
So that seems to be.
We got a plan.
That seems to be what most people are preferring at the moment. But does anyone want to argue to keep another option in the running, so to speak, for right now? Yes, Councilor Filio.
Yeah, just a couple of things to answer my esteemed counselor here. Why did we go away from the roundabout? Because our constituents didn't want it. We listened to them. That's what it was. Sometimes you have to listen to the people that put us here. With that said, I think the multi-lane hybrid does have some benefits. As Councilor Greenwald said, and him and I have agreed on this 100%, we didn't want to lose parking, we didn't want to mess up the common. Yeah, some of us historical does mean something. You know, it just does. Some people might not. They might just move to Keene and say don't like it. well, don't move to Keene. As far as the other recommendation, sending forward the original recommendation that came out of MSFI, send that also, because even though we said not major changes, some of the changes that was pointed out on the hybrid for downtown is what we talked about at MSFI. More modern lighting, change some of the turn lanes. We talked about that. So we had looked at that. So sending forward the MSFI original recommendation with the multi-lane hybrid, I think we can merge that together. We're getting there. I really think we are, and I think one more meeting in MSFI, we can send something back that the community will agree with.
Does anyone else want to argue for adding the MSFI one in there to keep it under consideration? Yes, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you look at the MSFI recommendation, it probably has the least amount of impact. It's probably going to cost the least amount. We don't know the dollars. The good thing about that, it's the most flexible. We could add pieces on to that wherever you want, wherever you think. It's the most flexible out of all the options. I think it should stay in there. It has the least amount of tree impact. It still makes that crossing from Railroad Square over to Gilboa Avenue, which I think we all like. I think the committee did a good job picking that, and as I said, from that point where the MSFI plan, you could add any of these other things on at a different time. It's the most flexible out of all of them.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Omeriad.
I will speak in support of going forward with two, the second one being the traffic circle. I
Okay.
will, and the reason I'm going to do that is because we're thinking a few years in the future. I still prefer the multi-lane hybrid, and I can speak to what was going through the minds of the Energy and Climate Committee. Exactly what was going through their minds. Number one, bicycles and electric single-use vehicles going through there. Second, electrification. So there's going to be, we're expecting there's going to be a lot of electric vehicles which are not going to have as much emission. That's the way that we may be wrong about how fast the transition is going to be, but on that committee, it was all about, because you'll notice in the recommendation that Zach wrote, is make sure we have enough infrastructure wherever it has to be for electric vehicles, which I think addresses the pollution concern.
So just putting this out there, recognizing that no one's speaking and saying that it shouldn't.
I'm sorry, George, we can't hear you back here.
Oh, my fault.
Thank you.
It doesn't sound like anyone's been speaking to not send it to MSFI after whatever you decide. So recognizing that the MSFI committee would have it again and has their ideas that they already kind of put forward. I mean, would people be opposed to sending the option C, which seems to have most of the consensus, and which is the multi-lane hybrid, and option B, which is the roundabout option to MSFI? If there are more people that want to send the option B to MSFI, speak up now, because I don't feel that there's a lot there, but I want to know. That's the, sorry, I've got them labeled on my own thing, the roundabout one. Yep.
I personally think that what I'm hearing, there's a consensus around the multi-lane hybrid model this evening. I think that needs to go to MSFI, and they need to hear what the public thinks about that particular model. And if they see any amendments or tweaks to that model, then they can make their recommendation back to this council and we can discuss it. I think sending back every single one of these drawings to MSFI, it defeats the entire purpose of this workshop, and that I understand that there are individual counselors who have preferences, but what I'm hearing no one say is that they don't like the hybrid model with multi-lanes. I think that even counselors who have preferences have that as a close running second. So in general, I'm feeling like there are definitely some options that are off the table here, and then that seems to be the glowing star.
Yeah, I agree. Counselor Giacomo.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to make something very clear, that the committee, after meeting for 10 times, after hearing everything, not the MSFI, the committee that actually worked on this project specifically, they came forward with a proposal, and that proposal was sent forward for a reason. And the reason was, they did a public survey, and the roundabout option was a preferred option by the public. We then had the option. We then had the hearing at the high school auditorium. In the hearing at the high school auditorium, we had 33 people, I believe, spoke with a pure, feeling one way or the other, very definitive. I kept notes on every single person, what every single person had to say, and I marked down what they were for and what they were against. There were more people in support of putting the roundabout in at that time than there were keeping the square the same. I think it was a 17-13. This is not a Facebook echo chamber that we live in reality here. The fact that 99% of Councillor Filio's friends support the same thing, it is not indicative of the public in general. And when we've had public outreach sessions, the public has absolutely come forward and said,
I'd ask the counselor to not
both ways.
refer to other counselors and their
My
intentions
apologies.
or anything
That is-
like that.
I'm sorry, Randy. Nope, that was completely uncalled for. But what we have heard from the public is a true division here. Absolutely a true division. It is closer to 50-50 than we think it is, and it's because right now we may be listening to some of the louder elements versus listening to the plurality. And that's all I have to say about that. I think we're paying attention to potentially the wrong noise right now.
All right. So what matters for this discussion is what the council feels, and if there are only 2 counselors that want to advocate for the roundabout option right now, that doesn't cut it. So does anyone else want to speak up to that? Yes, Kat.
I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay. I just want to give an opportunity for everybody to be heard on it, but it doesn't sound like their support. So right now, we're looking at the hybrid multi-lane option being the preferred option, and I would be open to a motion.
I'd like to make that motion to move Concept C, the multi-lane hybrid option, back to MSFI for public consideration and input. I further move to switch this month's regularly scheduled PLD and MSFI meetings to allow MSFI to meet on the 12th, so the recommendation can go to full council on the 20th for a final vote before
Second.
our vacation.
All right, we have a motion by Councilor Workman, second by Councilor Lake. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Councilor Greenwald.
I guess I just have to say, historically, workshops have not had motions. I disagree.
Bravo.
But you're saying it's okay. A nodding of head, a consensus would be more appropriate, but whatever.
Well, we've got a motion. I'm accepting the motion and the second. And if there's any discussion on that motion, further discussion? Seeing none? Oh, Councilor Johnson.
Yes, thank you kindly. Can we add the amendment that we keep the roundabout format in mind? That
You
would
could
be
make
those
that,
2.
you could make that motion. It would have to be seconded and voted on.
All right, I do so.
Is there a second?
Can we turn her volume up? Like, it's really hard to hear.
Oh, am I not
Is-
loud enough? I beg your pardon.
Yeah,
I thought-
all right, so is there a second?
Is this a movement to amend?
Yes.
Second, then.
All right, we have a motion to amend to include the roundabout option in the ones being considered. Motion made by Councilor Johnson, seconded by Councilor Giacomo. Any discussion? This is just on the amendment, so this is the amendment to add that to the recommendation. Seeing no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
No.
Counselor Rymie?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Counselor Giacomo?
Yes.
Counselor Filio?
No.
Counselor Williams?
No.
Counselor Jones?
No.
Counselor Madison?
No.
Counselor Roberts?
No.
Counselor Ormerod?
Yes.
Counselor Chadbourne?
No.
Counselor Workman?
No.
Counselor Greenwald?
No under duress.
Counselor Bosley?
No.
Counselor Powers?
No.
It's illegal.
All right, so I have 4 in favor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 opposed. The motion to amend does not pass, and we're back to the main motion to refer. Any discussion? Yes, Counselor Powers.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we've got a plan moving along here, but as we begin to discuss what we're getting closer and closer to, I think we really need to be cognizant of what the bike paths mean. We're gonna have to give up some space. So let's carefully look at that. There's gonna be a lot of discussion. There'll be very little use to start, maybe a lot of use in the future. Based on my prior experience, it does concern me that it's going to create more issues. But let's look at it. Let's let it go forward and understand there's some economic impacts of this, and there's some space that we may want to use for other things in the future. But this is kind of moving fast. Let's not forget those important things. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Counselor Chadbourne.
So as the mayor mentioned, all 4 of these include bike lanes, and they can be added, subtracted, that space can be used a different way. At least we have a base now, and we can go with that, and other things can be considered as we go along and as we hear from our constituents what they want. So, and, you know, as we listen to all the information. And I want to commend Counselor Bosley for bringing this other option forward. It was good visionary on her part, and they always say the best leaders are the ones that you don't know are leaders. And there's a Lao saying, and I can't think of the quotes, but anyways, so I think this is good, and I think we should vote to take it back to MSFI for people to weigh in on.
All right. Further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Counselor Wake?
Yes.
Counselor Remy?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Counselor Giacomo?
Yes.
Counselor Filio?
Yes.
Counselor Williams?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
No.
Counselor Madison?
Yes.
Counselor Roberts?
Yes.
Counselor Ormerod?
Yes.
Counselor Chadbourne?
Yes.
Counselor Workman?
Yes.
Counselor Greenwald? Counselor?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, it didn't sound like a yes. Counselor Bosley?
Yes.
Counselor Powers?
Yes?
All right. One opposed, but the motion carries. So this will go to the MSFI committee meeting, which will be swapped with the PLD meeting, and it'll be on July 12th. And I want to thank everybody for a good discussion among the council, and thank those in the public who attended tonight and who are watching from home. I think the process can be challenging and charged sometimes, but it does feel like progress is being made, and I want to thank everybody who contributed to that progress. We stand adjourned.